Hello everyone, bringing you a video today talking about Royal Navy action working dress, specifically that worn during the Falklands War, the patterns of shirt and the trousers worn during the Falklands War. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is the issues with kit and uniform which showed up during the course of the Falklands War have been talked about a lot. Obviously the issues with boots, whether the cold weather clothing was adequate and so forth. It's something that's received a lot of discussion. And one thing that's also been talked about is the fact that the Royal Navy's action working dress, the basic working uniform of the Royal Navy at the time, was made of polyester cotton. There'd been a shift away from pure cotton to polyester cotton, and that's the uniforms we're going to be looking at in this video. Issues encountered during the Falklands War would lead to fire-resistant action working dress being introduced in the middle 1980s. Because polyester is a thermoplastic, if you expose it to fire, it melts, which is not ideal when you're on a ship coming under fire and having to deal with fire. And obviously that was a major problem during the Falklands conflict and something which needed to be addressed. And the polyester cotton uniforms we're looking at here would soon be replaced by something better during the course of the 1980s. The shirt we're looking at on the mannequin here is of a pattern introduced in the 1960s, initially made in pure cotton, a heavier weight pure cotton than what we have here. This is a later example introduced during the course of the 1970s. It's exactly the same pattern, pleated pockets, same pattern of buttons and so forth. It's exactly the same cut. It's just made of polyester cotton. Now, the introduction of polyester cotton was seen to have two advantages. One, it's cheaper, no surprises there. And two, it was seen as being harder wearing as well. And it is. That is a fair assessment. Polyester cotton is harder wearing than pure cotton. Pure cotton tends to bobble and wear through more quickly than polyester cotton. The polyester toughens the fabric quite significantly. But obviously, if you don't fire-proof it in any way at all, you're going to have problems. So as I say, this pattern dates back to the 1960s. This particular shirt is from the 1970s and is made in polyester cotton. And in photographs, it's still common to see these, though they aren't the most up-to-date pattern. It's still common to see these worn during the course of the Falklands War. It's also possible some earlier patterns were still around as well in pure cotton. Obviously, the Navy aren't going to throw things away. They're not going to take a serviceable uniform off you necessarily. And certainly for working uniform, some of the older patterns may still have been around. So we're just looking at sort of the most common number 8 action working dress items which would have been around at the time. Two breast pockets, as you can see here, slightly scalloped, and you have a double pleat in each, as you can see. Large 2-hole buttons all the way down the front and on the pockets. No epaulettes. Fairly neat pointed collar there, as you can see. See that there, the shape of the collar. Quite a smart shirt really for a working shirt. This has seen some use. There are some stains on it, paint, and there's various bits that may be oil stains. We'll see that as we move it around and have a look at some of the other details. Moving this round to look at the right hand side here, you can see details of the cuff. Show that here. No gusset, just a small triangular piece there at the top to strengthen the seam where it opens up, and then a single button cuff there. Very, very simple, using the same type of large 2-hole buttons we saw closing the front. And as I say, no epaulette there, as you can see. And looking at the back here, you can see there's a yoke over the shoulders there, a double pleat at the back there, and you can see some of that staining I was talking about before. One thing to note with this is there are no rating badge on either sleeve, so I'm not going to show you the other sleeve. There's no need with that. It's exactly the same mirror image of what we've just looked at on the right hand side. I will turn this inside out, however, just to have a look at the label in the collar. So looking at the back here with this turned inside out, you see the seam of the yoke running across the shoulders there and the pleat in the back. And just below the collar we have the label, as you can see there, and the washing instructions as well. And in close up here you can see the details of this shirt, blue polyester cotton, unmarked. And then you have the NATO stock number underneath that, and the size, which is 14, and the manufacturer there, and the 1970s contract number, as you can see. And then you have the washing instructions, and obviously do not boil, do not starch warnings there on the main label, and then the washing and ironing instructions on the label to the right. So as I say, the previous shirt we looked at didn't have any insignia on it. This one does, which is nice. It shows the typical placement of badges and so forth of the time. This is the most up-to-date pattern of action working dress shirt which you would see issued during the Falklands War. And it's more akin to those that would come later and be worn right the way through into the 90s and the 2000s. But it does differ somewhat. It's still polyester cotton and it's not fire resistant at all. So you've gone over to small, more typical shirt type buttons, as you can see here. No pleats on the pockets, so the design's been simplified somewhat. You do, however, have epaulettes, and we'll see details of that as we move this round. The shirt is otherwise relatively similar in cut. The skirts are slightly different, but it is simplified in that way. You can see a fairly typical thing at the time, which is to have a name tape over the left breast pocket here, and typically these were a piece of white cloth or a piece of white tape stitched on with the name written in pen, or perhaps done with the type in some instances, the type block where those were still around, but we obviously have it just written in with pen here, fairly typical of the time. So K. Roche there. If anyone, it would be a small world indeed if someone recognised not only the name but the handwriting on that tab, on that name tape there. If anyone does, and I've got your old shirt or one of your shipmates' old shirts, let me know in the comments down below. That would be quite amusing if that did transpire and found out who this was and they saw this video. That would be quite interesting. So that's the front of the shirt there. As I say, not a huge amount more to talk about with that. It's a very simple design. The collar is a slightly more conservative design now. You don't have that sweeping point as we had on the previous one, which is quite an antiquated thing by this point. Feature of the design, that is to say. So we'll move this around and have a look at some of the other details. As I say, with this you now have epaulettes on the shoulder. Now this is something which was a step forward in design really. Previously, where officers wore the action working dress shirt, they would make holes and fit shoulder boards similar to those, well, basically those worn on tropical uniform. They'd fit shoulder boards on, hard shoulder boards. Having epaulettes means you can use rank slides, and rank slides for ratings were also being introduced around this time. So you'd see ratings badges move, or the substantive rating badge, which is to say leading rate, petty officer, etc., move up from the arm to being worn on the shoulders using slides. We still have the non-substantive or branch badge around on the arm here, and I hope I get this right because it's a bit of a tar pit when you start looking at post-war Royal Navy rating badges. I believe this is a Weapons Engineering Mechanic badge ordnance. So Weapons Engineering Mechanic ordnance, Weapons Engineering Mechanic denoted by the crossed missile torpedo and obviously the lightning bolts here, and then O being ordnance underneath. And this would be for someone who's passed as leading rate, because you've got the 2 stars. During the course of the Cold War, I think the mid-1970s onwards, there was a move to bring substantive and non-substantive rates closer together, because up to that point you could be a leading rate but very highly trained in certain trades, certain branches, or a petty officer and not highly trained, or you know, that sort of combination. You could have a high substantive rate and a lower non-substantive rate, so a lower level of training in your specific branch, and that altered during the course of the Cold War. The mid-1970s onwards, there was a move to bring those two closer together, so they both progressed together. So just to note that here, I believe that's what this badge is. I'd be very happy to be corrected on that if I've got it wrong, because as I say, that's it's something that is a bit of a minefield to try and get round. And this is printed on white cotton drill, and that was typical for the working dress badges. You'd see printed badges worn at this time. That's the badge, just talking about that briefly there. The cuffs, I've left these unbuttoned in this instance, but they have a single small shirt button. Let's button that up there. You can see that there, and then they just open up to there. A slightly more modern cuff design as well, the way this is manufactured here. Slightly more up-to-date design in that regard. Looking at the back here, you still have the yoke over the shoulders there, as you can see, as we had on the previous design, and then double pleat down the back there, as you can see. You'll notice on the left arm here, there is no substantive rating badge. You'd expect to see a leading rate here, I believe, given the non-substantive rate we have on the other arm. But again, at this point, epaulettes were being introduced, or rank slides were being introduced rather. So it may well have been you'd see this with rank slides and then the non-substantive rate worn on the arm. And this was a development which had come in around this time. They'd existed for a while for wear on foul weather clothing, rank slides for ratings, white with blue printing, similar to the arm badge we'd seen, but a new range of woven rank slides were being introduced around this time for wear on the shirt. So that's something you'd see coming in around this time, as I say. So we have another example of that pattern of shirt here. This one doesn't have the name tape, so I wanted to show you the previous one because that has both the non-substantive rate and the name tape over the pocket, which was quite typical for the time, so I wanted to show that insignia. Unfortunately, the label was missing from the previous example. This one has a complete label, which actually gives an immediate post-Falklands War contract number, I believe, but nevertheless, it's of the time period. So it's the same pattern, as you can see, has a different non-substantive rating badge, which we'll have a look at now. So just to briefly show you the different non-substantive rate badge we have on the arm here, the branch badge is that for a mine warfare rating, and you can see there an outline of a typical C mine, contact mine with MW in the centre, quite nicely picked out really, and again it's printed blue on this white cotton material as you can see there. And again, with this turned inside out on a mannequin, you can see that for this type of shirt, and this is where the label has been removed from the other one as well, the label is found up in the collar just above that rear pleat in the back of the shirt. As I say, the pattern of this is exactly the same. It just happens to have this complete label. We'll have a look at this in close-up now. You can see the close-up of the label here. The nomenclature has changed to shirt man's working blue. And then you have the NATO stock number underneath that. Interestingly, it has a 22B prefix to the stock number. Now, these are usually RAF related, and it may well mean, in fact, that the logical conclusion is that these were issued to both Royal Navy and Royal Air Force, because this one certainly has been issued to a Royal Navy rating. Beneath that you have the size 14, and the manufacturer, a prolific shirt manufacturer at the time, Ladybird Belfast, and you have the contract number underneath that, which would date this to around 1983 probably, so immediate post Falklands War, but nevertheless an example of the pattern, an example of the label you'd expect to find on this pattern of shirt which was issued during the conflict. And then further down the label you again have the washing and care instructions, in this instance printed on the same label as you can see here. And the final thing to talk about, of course, is the trousers. Now these are very dark navy blue. They are made of polyester cotton again, not fire resistant. The design for these would be somewhat simplified when you went over to the fire resistant type, but otherwise are visually quite similar. You can see here pleats at the front, the waistband here. They're otherwise plain down the legs. There's no lower pockets or anything on the legs. You just have the hip pockets at the side here, as you can see. You can see that there. The hip pocket worked into the side seam there, as you can see. One of those on each side. There is a rear pocket as well, which we'll look at in just a minute. The waist doubles over above the fly here, as you can see, and that fastens with 3 buttons. So you have a button in the centre here, a reverse button, the button's back through the waistband, and then 2 buttons here, which button into concealed buttonholes on the end of the strap there. So it's completely concealed opening when you button these up. The buttons are all concealed. The fly is also a button fly, as you can see there. We open this right up, you can see. And then you have side adjusters. If I just move these around here, you have side adjusters here, and these again operate with buttons rather than anything else. You just have 2 buttons underneath, and if you use that button there, it's on its loosest, and if you button it to this button here, you obviously tighten it in by about 1 inch on each side, and it just loops through this metal loop here, sewn onto this little strap on the other side. So very simple side adjusters, and there's one of those on each side. These would be simplified in the following pattern, the following fire resistant pattern. They wouldn't use buttons, and the waist fastening would be modified as well to use hooks and slots rather than using buttons. If we look at the rear here, you can see you have a single rear pocket buttoned through with a bag, an internal bag for the pocket. See the rear seam there, the details of construction. And I've turned these inside out now. There's not a huge amount more detail to see really. They are a very plain pair of dark blue trousers, but you can see at the rear here we have the strengthening piece across there where the pocket opening is, and then the bag for the pocket. And the bag for the pocket is where you will find the label in these, generally speaking. We'll have a look at this in close up now. And you can see the nomenclature for these basically follows that which we saw on the earlier shirt. Trousers, men's, polyester and cotton unmarked. And then you have the NATO stock number underneath that. And these are size 9. And a lot of the label is unfortunately lost under what's been an ink mark over there. But you do have the manufacturer and again a 70s contract number. And at the bottom there you have very similar washing and care instructions as we saw on the first pattern of shirt which we looked at. So I hope you found it interesting looking at this. Action working dress isn't a particularly well covered topic. I find it very interesting. I've always had an interest in the Royal Navy. Obviously it was my initial intention to hope to join the Royal Navy, which didn't transpire. Action working dress is relatively difficult to collect because obviously being a working uniform, it got used up. And also on the surplus market, blue shirts, dark blue trousers have a good resale value for working clothing and so forth as well. So a lot of it got used up basically. So it's a little bit difficult to collect. It's quite hard to find some of these items. It's been very nice to put together what is almost a timeline. I think I have pretty much a timeline of number 8 uniform now through into the late 1980s. So quite pleased with that. And it's an iconic part of the Royal Navy's Cold War appearance in the uniform. Obviously it was introduced at the end of the Second World War and worn right the way through obviously until the introduction of PCS, the personal clothing system. So there it is. As I say, hopefully you found it interesting looking at this. If you have and you'd like to see more from the channel, please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as ever, a massive thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It's greatly appreciated, as I always say. Thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.